Welcome back. This is Startacus Chats at Digital DNA. My name is Alastair Cameron and I am joined by Paul, who is the director of the Tughans Contracts and Technology team. Paul, thank you ever so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit more about Tughans and also your role within the team.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. Tughans is a full-service commercial law firm here in Belfast, so I sit within the Contracts and Technology team. I'm a director there. We really specialise in advising mostly startups and any other sort of size business in a real range of sectors as well, specialising particularly in intellectual property advice, commercial contracts, and a lot of data protection advice as well.
Great stuff. And what type of typical questions do startups come to you with at that maybe earlier stage? Like, what are the type of things that they need to know or are looking to find out?
It really depends on the type of business, but particularly with startups, the real critical stuff is intellectual property ownership. Yeah. They really need to get that right from the beginning to make sure that what they're bringing to the market eventually, they own, they can do with what they want, and they're not really tying themselves up in circles from the beginning. So if we can advise them on that and lead them through that, a quiet word or dealing something more tangible like a written terms and conditions or a contract in place, as long as they get that stuff right from the beginning, it gives them the springboard to move on to what they want to do later.
Yeah, you mentioned contracts, and that's something that obviously a lot of founders probably find out a little bit late about, is obviously the need to make sure they're protecting themselves. Obviously not just internally with those contracts, with maybe even employees or like anyone that they outsource work to, but maybe those early stage businesses that they do work with or MVP with.
Absolutely, that's totally critical. They need to make sure that whoever's creating IP for them, that they own and it goes into the company properly, and then whenever they're dealing with their customers, that they can continue to commercialize it and expand upon what they want to do exactly as they want. You need to have a good roadmap out in front of you and make sure that they're getting the T's and C's right from the beginning.
And a typical problem that you do see within founders obviously is maybe they outsource their tech and they haven't got those T's and C's in place, that the tech is actually owned by the startup. The developers are actually building something but have ownership over it. Is that quite common?
Absolutely, yeah. And it is one of those sort of myths that if I've asked somebody to do something for me, I must own the intellectual property. And it is much more of a headache to try and retrospectively go back and say, hey, that thing that you created for me, can we make sure that I own that, please? You lose all leverage there. So getting that right from the start of the engagement is crucial, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's that awkward thing that you have to get used to doing. It's having awkward conversations, perhaps with friends, because it might be a friend that's building the tech for you, or obviously even if it's a co-founder, perhaps. It's getting rid of that awkwardness and just being upfront and understanding that there is a process that has to be followed, and it's not that you're doing anything different, it's just the process.
Yeah, totally. And I think anyone that you're bringing a contract to should be hopefully not put off by the fact that the contract's in place. It shows a maturity of your business as well. Like, we need to get this right just to keep everyone on the same page, literally. And this shouldn't be put off by it. An upfront conversation at the beginning is much more beneficial and productive to the relationship. And obviously everyone wants to keep those relationships. The startup world is small and you want to be making sure that you're setting down the right foundations. So if you can get that right and make sure that everyone's pulling in the same direction, it's much more beneficial. Well,
let's try and demystify a few terms, perhaps obviously that would appear in contracts, or like terminology that a founder might be like, I don't even know what that means from So give us an example of a term that perhaps a founder might not know about within a contract, perhaps.
Yeah, I think some of the common parlance, people would say, time is of the essence here. What does that mean? Well, it means we probably need to get that done very quickly. Actually, time of the essence is something much more legalistic and formal. If you go over when something's time is of the essence and you're late in delivering, that means that the customer could terminate the contract and sue you for damages. So avoiding that kind of language is kind of news to people that actually they didn't realize that was so important. And it can become important in a very real way.
I didn't realize that. You saying that as a term, you just assume it's just like part of the terminology that people use. But to understand that is part of a contract perhaps as well is really interesting.
Absolutely, and that's why that's why I enjoy working with startups, because you do what you do and you do it very well. I'll do what I do and I do it very well as well. So we're working on this together.
And I think obviously that's something that startups perhaps initially struggle with, is understanding that they are still part of this big machine or the corporate industry, and avoiding the kind of like the kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and the commercial aspects of what you do is only going to be detrimental to your business down the line.
Yeah, totally. And you see that in a lot of different areas or sectors as well. Obviously, intellectual property is absolutely key. Data protection is another one. It's much harder to try and retrofit stuff into your product to say, I'm compliant with laws, or I can do this, I can use this data in how I want. Trying to do that after the fact is tricky. It can be expensive, and it could in fact just say, we can't do it, you need to scrap that.
Well, we need to talk about GDPR. So where are we at in terms of GDPR? We're still following EU regulation there?
To an extent. So GDPR came from EU law, but after Brexit everything was brought under the UK statute book. For the moment, I say with a tongue-in-cheek, for the moment, we haven't departed too much. We've still got the UK GDPR as it is, and we've got our domestic law as well. Whether that'll change in the future remains to be seen. I think there's a push in the UK government to try and simplify the compliance for businesses, which is only good news, but the sting in the tail of that is data transfer is really, really important, right? So if we're sending data to another country that isn't the EU, we need to think, can I do this lawfully? For the moment, the EU and the UK are on the same page. We're saying it's the same law. You're going to look after data as well as our laws require us to do. That's fine, it can transfer. But if UK tries to go too far away from the current status quo, that kind of puts that in jeopardy. So it's an interesting balance to be struck there of trying to simplify it, but also not totally change the game.
And that's something founders need to consider down the line as well, isn't it? Is like, if you're trading against jurisdictions, even if you have an online business and you have T's and C's that are in place from wherever you're based, if you're trading in another operational area or outside of the EU perhaps, then GDPR might, or regulations that apply in that country might be completely different. It's still something you've got to consider for your business if you're operating internationally. Totally.
And it depends on the law, it depends on the local jurisdiction, what you're doing. If we take data protection as an example, if you are targeting a citizen or a resident of another jurisdiction, they will expect that their data is going to be protected in the same way. So founders need to have an awareness of where they're doing business as well as just where they're doing business from.
Great stuff. I feel like we've just done a crash course in some of those areas, and obviously there's so much, and that's why things like the one-to-ones that you guys offer, the office hours that Tughans do, the sponsoring of events like this is so important, because getting out there and speaking to founders and giving them that advice, if it's 15 minutes or an hour, that one piece of advice might save them lots of money down the line, isn't it? So thank you ever so much for your support with Digital DNA and the upStart Startup Zone, but other events in Northern Ireland as well, and obviously the work that you do on a startup level all the way up to corporate. So obviously it's great to have Paul with us from Tughans. We'll be back soon with more Startacus chats.